But to answer your question, I think the how you practice makes a big difference in what happens with your mind.
Can we do just kind of like a shotgun list? Can you run me through all 10?
Number one is you don't know your limits. Thinking habit number two, you create your own intelligence. Thinking habit number three, set goals but focus on the path. Thinking habit four, make it happen and let it happen. Thinking habit five, observe and celebrate small gains. Thinking habit six, make difficulty disappear. Thinking habit seven, outgrow your mistakes. Thinking habit eight, see through setbacks. Thinking habit number nine, trust the breakthrough. Thinking habit 10, be a joyful work in process. When we learn to integrate all those 10 habits in the towards the mastery of a game, we can become awesome in a pretty short period of time. I started much smarter really because of an experience I've had as a learner. Most of what I'm good at today, or most of what I'm really good at today, maybe at one time I wasn't good at it at all.
Hey guys, how you doing today? This is John Klein with the $100 Million Podcast. Super excited. Our $100 Million guest of today is Steven. Steven, how you doing?
Great, John. How about you?
Doing awesome, doing awesome. It's a great, beautiful day out here, South Florida. Steven, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
I'm Steve Schecter, founder of Much Smarter. I want to talk today about how I started the company and how I am transitioning it to be a scalable business that's going to grow to 9 figures.
9 figures, 9 figures. That's super exciting. I'm excited to hear some action items, some different advice that you have to tell us on how you're going to get to 9 figures. So I'll kind of let you, I know you kind of already have some things written out, and I'm excited to hear more what you have to say.
Well, I started Much Smarter really because of an experience I've had as a learner. I think I've primarily seen myself as a learner. I think I'd go so far as to say most of what I'm good at today, or most of what I'm really good at today, maybe at one time I wasn't good at it at all. So learning was a big thing for me. I had an experience between college and graduate school where I surprised myself as to what I could do with my own mind. I had been a little bit of an underachiever in high school, did well anyway, wound up being in business for myself after college, but I was just kind of curious, what could I really do with my mind if I really put my mind to it? So I applied myself to taking a big bad test called the GMAT. It's for Graduate School of Business. And the true background I had for the GMAT was from studying music. I learned from studying music seriously. I knew how to break down difficulty. I knew how to take something that was complicated and break it down into small working parts so the thing that began as difficult actually wasn't. And so I applied this to this GMAT. The first time I took a practice test, it was like bottom 10th percent of the population. So I was out of school for 3 years. I hadn't taken a single math course in college, and I'd forgotten most of what I'd learned about reading and writing. So there I was, bottom 10th percent of the population. I wasn't fazed at all because from what I had learned about studying music. I put together a 4-month plan for myself. At the end of the 4 months, I found myself with a 99th percentile score on this big bad test and a full fellowship to study business at Columbia. Now, there were a few things about this which were interesting to me. Number one, this was a result I could not have achieved coming out of high school. It was almost like I was a different guy. And that was kind of interest to me because, wait a second, how'd this happen, right? But there were a few morals of the story. One moral of the story was I could take skills that I developed in one area and apply it to a completely different area. That was kind of big. In other words, and the next thing I was going to do, which was to get signed up to work at a major company, I could convince them that a guy whose principal experience before that was leading a rock band could be entrusted with developing products. So I think the ability to jump from one game to another was meaningful because at the time, people thought more in terms of silos, right? You were a math brain or you were an English brain, but the idea that you could apply your smarts anywhere you want was kind of big. That was one learning. The second learning is that the limits we think we have we don't have. So it was sort of, yes, it was great to win a full ride to study business at a great school, but the inner learning was more important. I kept that with me. So I went to work developing products for large companies and small. I would say I developed, in terms of revenues, I developed about $150 million of product streams, and that was an enjoyable accomplishment. Obviously, you learn a lot by doing that. There were certain holes in my background that I wanted to fill before I went full-fledged into being in business for myself. I wound up working with a couple of entrepreneurs, and I helped them develop new products. I helped them expand their business, learned a lot. I actually took a short period of time off to write and produce a musical on Broadway, which was an amazing. I produced it for one night only, but it was, I learned a lot about achieving something that just taking something fresh out of your mind and creating it in the world. That was a very powerful experience. And then I didn't really know what my own successful business was going to look like. So I think the universe stepped in. I had been volunteering with young people in New York City, mainly teaching them social skills. Like I was with a group that taught young people social skills and helped them get internships in big companies in New York. And one day, a guy who was college planner at a private school on Long Island approached me and said, "Steve, I really wish you were available to work with our students." And because I didn't think he was serious, I said, "Sure, no problem." And some months later, he starts selling me students, and this was how my accidental tutoring company was born. Wasn't something I was looking for, but when he started sending me students, I thought to myself, I thought back to the learning experience I had, and I said, well, I made a difference. I changed the trajectory of my own life by learning how to work with my own brain. And so now I'm getting these requests for me to do that with students. And I thought, well, this is great. So Jhana was kind of a really cool thing because I was successful with that right away. But what was deeper about it was the level of satisfaction. In other words, it was something like, as a lifelong musician, I had set it up in my brain that I love music and I like business, but because the business was so, I guess, personal and so helpful to young people, and you have that feeling of doing something good in the world, I have to say I loved it, and I've loved it ever since. And that's really why I've been doing it now for 22 years. And that was how I got started as an entrepreneur.
Man, that's awesome. Tell me a little bit about the strategy behind, like, learning something. I mean, obviously, you got into tutoring, you found a lot of success, people like the way you taught. Do you feel like something that you said is you create your own intelligence by the way you practice. So do you feel that some people are just born smarter, they're gonna get straight A's, or do you think it's a way that they practice education more makes the difference than, you're born with it or you're not?
I think the you're born with it or you're not is where we come from. I think that's the past. I think that a growing percentage of people are aware that um, it's what you do with it that counts, but the systems are not really fully equipped. If you look at a school system, it's still basically expecting maybe 10% to shine and most to do okay. Um, it's and there are lots of difficulties in a system. We're all different, right? We're all unique, and yet a school system is as hard as they try. A school system has a certain standardization to it, and even if the school system does a great job, it's natural for kids to compare themselves with others. So, but to answer your question, I think the um, how you practice makes a big difference in what happens with your mind. So, in other words, the best analogy is like building muscles in a gym. So, if you and I, went into the gym unpracticed first day, maybe one of us would be stronger than the other, but neither of us really knows how far we can go, right? And the one that began stronger might in the end not be the stronger one because you don't You don't foresee the impact of training. So I think that our whole approach was built on where neuroscience has gone in the past, I don't know, probably 30 years, which is to say, our intelligence is what we make of it. It's not that the set point doesn't matter at all, but you start with a genetic predisposition, but then you really don't know the limits of where you can take yourself with practice. And this is not something that's merely my opinion. This is something well documented. There's a woman who has an institute in Toronto who was diagnosed as, being below average intelligence. Um, she had all kinds of problems, and she trained her own brain over a period of time. Her parents were worried about her simply making it through high school alive, and she trained her own brain and is now teaching people all over the world. So I'm a big believer in our potential, and I believe that each of us, given the tools, can go much farther, and that's part of the mission.
Awesome. I'm gonna pause for a second. There's some kind of feedback coming through. Put your thing on mute real quick, and then take it back off. Do you put yours on mute?
You want me to put it on mute?
Yeah, you put it on mute.
Hold on. How do I do that? Let's see. Mike.
Okay, turn it back on. Okay, it's still there. Did a fan kick on or something?
No.
AC kick on? There's any kind of noise? Because there's a constant feedback coming through,
Gosh.
and it goes away when you mute it.
Hold on one second. Maybe it's coming from my phone. I'm gonna get off and put my phone in another room.
I mean, it shouldn't. It sounds like air. Is you have an AC fan? Because
No,
I
I
mean, your
don't.
mic might be really
I have a
sensitive.
neighborhood
Is there like construction going on outside?
suburb here. Let me try to close the window. Is that better?
It is a little bit.
Oh,
Window's closed.
yeah. This you feeling? Boy, you must have a great mic because I'm barely hearing it here. How's it now? Better? All right.
All right, awesome. So tell me a little bit more about like the actual learning. Tell me some tactics about educating yourself because you say once you kind of learn how to really get good at one thing, you're able to take that system and apply it to other things that you want to learn and get good at. Give me some different tactics for educating yourself.
You don't mind if I give you a little bit of a shout out of a compliment here. You are one heck of an interviewer because you ask the great questions. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
So here's what I learned. I had already suspected this with my own learning, but when I started working with students, here's what I learned right away: that the common denominator that can make all learning very powerful is to zero in on making a game of it. In other words, you conceive of it as a game of skill, and you set up a playing field which enables you to get your back, outmoded ideas out of the way and just prepare yourself to win. Let me give you an example. One of my earliest students was a guy whose parents had taken him to psychologists and psychiatrists. They had a book this thick about all the problems he was supposed to have. And when I gave him a little work to do, he was able to answer about 10% of his questions. Parents said you could never get him to do his math homework. I mean, this sounds like a case, right? But the guy wanted to do well. So his mom gave me one clue. I said, is there a zone of excellence in his life? And she said, yeah. She said, he loves both tennis and basketball. If he's practicing tennis or basketball, he's up at 8 in the morning and he's practicing till the sun goes down or sometimes later. And so I took that as a clue and I said, okay, this is a game of skill. This happened to be a standardized test that he wanted to prepare for. And I said to him, Jonah, what would happen if you practiced math the same way you practice tennis? And he said, without any hesitation, Steve, I'd be a math monster. And it didn't turn out to be strictly true in the period of time, but you wouldn't have recognized him in the end compared to in the beginning. It was like a new guy, and he had an understanding. Now I needed to give him more than just that, but once he understood it as a game, what happens? The idea, I'm bad in math goes away for a minute. The idea that by equating it in his mind with something he's already good at and showing him the lines of how you take skills learned in one arena into another liberates him to just play. And John, If you go to the gym consistently over a period of time, you will become stronger. People progress at different rates. And if you use your mind in a certain way over a period of time, it will become stronger. So a lot of the trick is just getting a lot of the garbage out of the way.
Yeah, I love that. Tell me a little bit about the psychology of it. I don't know if you know the book Psycho-Cybernetics, where it talks a lot about the power of the mind, going over things and like presuppositions when it comes to my teacher always told me I was bad at math, and then so the whole entire universe would fall apart if I ever was actually good at math. That's kind of something that he uses in the book in Psycho-Cybernetics, so to kind of talk about that. Do you find that a lot? Because you were kind of talking about his teacher says he's bad at math and all these different things. Do you find that a lot in your tutoring where people have this kind of mental block where they feel like somebody told them they were not good at English, somebody told them they were a bad writer, and then so now they think that. And do you have a strategy to kind of unlock that or get past that?
It is the big fan of psycho-cybernetics, by the way, John. But it is the single biggest issue. In other words, and sometimes it's the teacher, sometimes it's just the young person getting the wrong idea. I mean, just imagine, oh, I don't know, fifth or sixth grade, and you start getting all these red marks on math papers. They go home to your parents are upset with you. There are parent teacher conferences. What is a young person going to take away from that? They're going to start making all kinds of associations. But I think the biggest thing, here's the psychology of it, the biggest thing is our habits of thinking. Now, John, we've identified over the years of working with young people, we've identified 10 habits of thinking that are associated with students of success. So we're putting that on the positive side. On the flip side, it's usually unlearning a habit of thinking that was holding them back. So I want to kind of, without needing to go into all 10, which would be a little tedious for our conversation, our habits of thinking come down to two big things. Number one, expand your view of your own potential. And number two, shrink your view of difficulty. So, in other words, it's the same thing as what you were talking about with if I think I'm bad at something, if I automatically think that math or chemistry or anything else, or even starting a business, if I automatically think of those things as difficult, then I begin to think about all the reasons I can't do it, right? So the 10 thinking habits group themselves into I want nothing more. The thing I want most for my student is expand your sense of your own potential and shrink the way you view difficulty.
Can we do just kind of like a shotgun list? Can you run me through all 10?
Hap- Happy to do it.
Yeah, just name them off. Yeah,
Yeah, happy to do it. So, number one is you don't know your limits. That's thinking habit number one. Thinking habit number two, you create your own intelligence. Thinking habit number three, set goals, but focus on the path. Thinking habit four, make it happen and let it happen. And we can dig into that, but this could equally be a text on sports psychology, John, because we're talking about a game here.
I
Thinking
love that.
Thinking habit five, observe and celebrate small gains. Thinking habit six, make difficulty disappear. Thinking habit seven, outgrow your mistakes. Thinking habit eight, see through setbacks. Thinking habit number nine, trust the breakthrough. Thinking habit 10, be a joyful work in process. Now, I can tell you when you learn, when I say you, not you personally, but you in general, when we learn to integrate all those 10 habits and the applicate towards the mastery of a game, we can become awesome in a pretty short period of time. And I tell you what, when we say a short period of time, let's say somebody's got low self-confidence and has never done well, and they invest a semester in going through this kind of process and they come through it on the other side a way more confident and capable person. Wasn't that a pretty short period of time? I mean, is that a lot of time to spend on changing the trajectory of your life? I don't believe so.
I love it. And one thing that I just want to, I mean, it's kind of obvious that all 10 of those things that you named off are thinking habits. I mean, you just said they're the 10 thinking habits of successful people that you find that actually, like, make it a success, and what I love about that is, again, it's a thinking habit. There's nothing physical. It's completely free. There's nothing, there's no, like, specific magic pill or anything like that. It's the power of your own thought for, would you say, anything that you want to accomplish.
Anything,
Yeah.
anything. And here's the there is magic though, because, if I read them in a book, if I read about those in a book, I get some value out of it. But if I apply them to the mastery of a game, there's a multiplier effect. Let me just give you a little bit of a genesis. When I began my tutoring company, I saw the world as I saw my mission as teaching three things initially. I said, we're gonna teach students how to think, how to feel, and how to learn, right? But I have evolved it a little bit. At the time, there was a wonderful book about mindset by a woman, about growth mindset by a woman named Carol Dweck. Wonderful book, has been very influential. But I felt like we needed to go beyond mindset because, we've all been to we've all read great books, we've all read great seminars, but the magic is in the application. So here's, I think, where the magic occurs. If I can take a great idea and transform it into a habit, that's when I really get a difference in my life. And that's where the game comes in. It's like effective thinking habits meet a safe challenge. And that, to me, is the heart of education. Apply yourself to a safe, what I mean by that is a safe challenge. I don't need to learn this while I'm trying to drive my motorcycle over a chasm, 5,000 feet up. That's not a safe challenge. But an intellectual challenge is a safe challenge. There are all kinds of safe challenges, and that's the essence of training, where it's not life and death, but it's something that you can learn stuff so that when you get the life and death challenges, you're able to handle them.
100%. Tell me a little bit about some of the difficulties you find having people, have these thoughts, these ideas, right? These 10 mastery thoughts, and then actually being able to put that into application. Because as you said, understanding them, reading them in a book and understanding, and then actually applying. Tell me about that little gap in between the actual application of it. What are some ways that you found people have a hard time actually applying it? And what are some different strategies that we can use to better apply those thoughts into an actual simple winning task?
Yeah, I think we've gotten better and better at that. One of the challenges I had in the beginning was maybe a challenge of labeling. In other words, when this gentleman at the private school started sending me students, the problem, we had too many students, and too many students came to us with the generic title of the leading SAT coach. And so I'm coming approached by people who want a couple of hundred points on their SAT, and what their child often needs is transformation. So there was a period of time where I had to better and better define what we were doing, and I would say gradually over time, we've culled out the practice to have more and more of the people that we can benefit most. So what are the challenges? Here would be a challenge, John. Supposing I'm looking to teach a young person to have respect for their own capabilities. And what if the parent is riding them mercilessly? Suppose I spend an hour or two a week with them, and the parent is riding them mercilessly in between. Or the parent is saying, if you don't get into Harvard, we don't want you in our family, right? I mean, those are some of the difficulties. But honestly, the process we've built, it's actually kind of amazing how much you can get through to people. Let me give you an example, and this was a fairly short-term thing. We had a student named Nicholas, and wonderful young man, eighth grader, and he had just developed this I guess, emotional intensity that every time he got a question wrong, he apologized. I mean, this guy was so hard on himself that it actually showed up as being academically incompetent, right? In other words, he was almost dysfunctional academically. And in a fairly short period of time, I taught him how to let some of that stuff go. and he was surprisingly receptive. And honestly, within 6 weeks, he had improvements in his academic performance that I can simply not explain by any of the academic practice he did. You see what I'm saying? In other words, this felt like, I sent him into the gym, and 6 weeks later, he was lifting, 350 pounds, right? It wasn't, it didn't, it seemed disconnected from the actual practice he was doing. So in other words, I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that so the process of having a systematic way of visiting with these thinking habits, trying them on for yourself, observing them, and then applying them to a ready challenge, an at-hand challenge, and then starting to get feedback from you're doing better at that challenge, you're kind of creating a reinforcement cycle that can really create some dramatic change in a young person. And we've had incredible changes in young people, and gosh, it's an incredibly rewarding thing, and it's partly why I've done it so long. John, I think I'm a versatile kind of person, and I don't say that to brag. I guess I would say I probably am. I probably live by my own example of being able to go from one game to the next confidently. But this 22 years working with young people is the longest I've done anything. And I guess you're probably going to understand why.
I love that. I love that. Before we move on to the next thing, I want to talk about applying these 10 thinking habits, these different strategies for education and, excelling yourself in a certain would say like we're talking right now about academics, say math for perspective, but for this being like the business podcast, how can we apply these different thoughts to learning something new in our business? Whether it's like, okay, you have that mind block. I don't know how to do marketing. It's so hard to understand how to media buy and marketing and making ads for my business and stuff like that. How can we use these different learning tactics to go about educating ourselves on these different things that we need in our business?
Yeah, I think it's completely applicable to excelling in business. I think entrepreneurs just like students, they develop blind spots. They get locked in on things that they think they can't do. But it's really the three modalities we have: successful habits of thinking, successful habits of feeling, successful habits of learning, and just to organize them around the looking at them in the simplest possible way. Successful habits of feeling mean that you are again expanding your own the sense of your own potential. Don't we do that all the time, John? I mean, didn't Lee Iacocca, when he went from being kind of the chief marketing guy at Ford to the savior of Chrysler? I don't know if you know that story. It was a big story in the some time ago. But as we go from one level to the next, we have to kind of carve out a new space of new potential. And the other big thing is being able to see through difficulty. All of the great ones manage to transmute difficulty into something else. They make it work for them as against them. And so for me, it's the idea that difficulty is always temporary, that difficulty is relative. There's always help that you can get for it. And if we think about it, being a business person is dealing with difficulty all the time. So successful thinking habits are very much a part of being a successful business person, maybe even more so successful habits of feeling, because one thing we can be guaranteed of as business people is adversity. It's just built in. I haven't seen anyone who goes through a business life without adversity. When you learn successful habits of feeling, you separate yourself out from the vast majority of the population, which is ill-equipped to deal with adversity. And I'm not making a judgment on people, but most people are trained to feel the way they happen to feel on a given day. But champions, whether it's in sports or business, choose their response. They choose their emotional response. And so businesses,
I like that, champions. I always like verbiage like that.
Yeah, I mean,
The champions.
some so, this is really the essence of it, to be able to choose your response, and then habits of learning, you know, the making a game out of it. I think we can make a game out of a business strategy. Everything we do in business is experimentation. It's you never know 100% the new thing you're trying whether it's right or not. So you develop a you develop a successful mode of experimentation. So yeah, I think it's completely applicable. And I think the great thing, it's not a one-time process. Making your brain work for you is a lifelong thing. I wouldn't even call it a difficult thing. It's something you get better and better and better at over time. So wonderful to learn it young, but if you were 50 and learning it for the first time, great.
I love that. And obviously, talking to you a little bit off camera and stuff like that too, you're obviously very much the authority when it comes to high level tutoring and taking people from, A to Z when it comes to educating themselves for success and whatever they're trying to do academically. Tell me about how you're going to kind of take this system that you've made, this tutoring system, you're going to apply it into a business model and how you're going to make it to be this nine-figure business.
Okay, so first step is to turn everything we do into a process, right? So initially I was just one talented tutor. And that's okay. Some people spend a whole career doing that, right? You're like initially thought to myself, maybe I'll just be the kid whisperer. You ever heard of the horse whisperer? I could be the kid whisperer. Um, but I felt that at a certain point, you want to be able to go further. If I'm if I'm if I'm if I've seen thousands of students over the last 22 years, wouldn't it be better to make this benefit available to tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands? So the first thing is to define it as a process. And then there are two parts to that. One is that some friends of my son who had gone to NYU, some friends of my son had formed a little tech team, and they said, "Steve, we like what you're saying about um, approaching learning as a game of skill. What if we create a game for you? What if you hired us to create a game for you?" And I did. We've kind of got the game sorted out. We actually have 4 games. We got them sorted out um, as a kind of a support for our tutoring process. But essentially, what we've been doing is um, learning how to use the game and learning how to do the tutoring process as a system that doesn't require a highly experienced or a highly talented tutor to deliver. So the thing is, the building blocks are the highly organized step-by-step tutoring process. That's one level. The second level is getting the game to do the same work. So we have learned the messaging that attracts parents and students to the game and works. What we want, what we have very specific plans to do is to make the game do the work that the tutoring does, but at a much more affordable. If the game does 80% of what the one-on-one tutoring does, then it becomes hugely valuable at a much lower price point. So we are in the process of loading an enormous amount of value into the game and making it accessible for really the wide variety of people. The third piece of that is the niche. So in other words, we're staying for the moment, and I'm going to say in the moment, we're staying for the moment in the standardized test space. The reason for the standardized test space is I believe it's an overlooked opportunity for several reasons. Number one, um, the the resources that are available to help young people with standardized tests don't help our young people. In other words, they don't address any of the things that we've been talking about. So the kid that's never been successful in school, or the kid that's got bona fide test anxiety, or the kid that has multi-year math wounds, they're going to be able to come to our game and they will get help that they're not getting anyplace else. And then the final piece of that, which we're perfecting, is the messaging to draw parents to the game. So I'd like you just to envision this system and process. And I've got a long background of developing systems and processes so that over the next few months, all of these are tested and they're working. So we've got the product that works better than anything else does at a really affordable price point. We've got an identifiable niche, but the niche is actually quite large. And then the messaging to reach that niche. So when all of those pieces are in place and they're coming together as we speak, I then go back to what I learned as a product developer. Essentially, I build the entire thing through joint venturing. In other words, what I learned as a product developer early on was how to be the tail that wags the dog. So essentially, if you have a superior process, in other words, if you have a superior process both from the marketing point of view, the product point of view, and the technology point of view, then you look around and you see who are the big players that can benefit from that process, particularly against their competitors, and who are the two big players or so that you can put together with our value-added process in the middle. So essentially what we will do is we will initially reshape the standardized test industry primarily through alliances and joint ventures. And that'll be phase one. What that will enable us to do is to get our game up to this level from the standpoint of both technology and content. And then I think we'll make a broader assault maybe sounds like the wrong word. It's not, it's, I don't know if it's a war. It's really when you talk about building alliances is really just thinking about how to help people, gain something from what you do. But we will have a broader view as to really transforming education. We want to look at whole systems of education because, early in our conversation, you recognize some significant problems. Why is education so broken? And a lot of it is because of standardization, and a lot of the solutions will initially be well-intentioned, but they'll fall short. In other words, you'll let students do whatever they want, but they won't have the right training, so that you won't be able to get measurable outcomes. I believe that with the right approach and with giving students the skills to accomplish what they can accomplish with their own brain, I believe that within 5 years or so, Much Smarter starts to look like, the an entity that delivers private school type outcomes, but at a price that's available to the masses. And that's how we get to the nine figure and then some. That's how we become a major enterprise.
So when it comes to you have the system, you have the course build out, are you doing this on a subscription plan or is it a one-time purchase?
No, it's a subscription plan. Yeah,
Mm, beautiful.
subscription plan. There's an initial free trial. The calculus of whether you stay with the difference between the free trial and the value you get with the subscription is so dramatic and so tuned in to our particular marketplace. It's already a ridiculous value proposition, John. A parent actually chose to send their child to us for their gap year instead of sending them to a boarding school. I mean, let's mull on that for a second, because what did they want from the gap year? They felt that their child needed a little more confidence, a little more seasoning before they go off to college. And instead of sending them to an established, well-known boarding school, they thought enough of our process and the power of the 10 thinking habits, 10 feeling habits, and 10 learning habits that they felt that would be the best education for their child before going off to college. So I think we'll ultimately have our own educational system. Whether that means we'll, you know, partner with systems of charter schools, I can't quite outline that yet, but I have a clear path of how we get to our first 100,000 students, and that will be a chunk of the standardized test market. And
Love that.
that will get us to about 30 to 50 million a year. And then from there, we'll identify a bigger mission to get us into the nine figures. And I use that really mostly to talk about scale. From one perspective, how high is up? Honestly, John, I don't think I'm going to be any happier with a $100 million business than with the boutique business that I have today. On the other hand, there will be some satisfaction in serving more students and families as a creator. I mean, I started out life as a musician and as a composer. As a creator loves to create, and a creator loves to see their creations grow. And so that may be a more powerful motivation. Certainly, it's more powerful motivation than the 100 million label.
For sure, for sure. Give me some action items of how you're gonna get to your first million.
So the step one, and it's in process. We're perfecting the messaging so that it becomes so that it that it's that the messaging and the whole process is well documented. In other words, it's something that's repeatable. We're up leveling the value on the game, and with those things accomplished, this is probably another 2-3 quarters. We'll also have a joint venture process mapped out, and essentially we'll do some small joint ventures to start and kind of get them broken in, and then we're going to look for some larger partners. Essentially, two questions. And this actually is the second piece will take us beyond well into the seven figures. Essentially, who already has our clients that doesn't do what we do? And then we do that, and then we seek out a larger version of our own company that doesn't have our technology and that doesn't serve our niche. And we put those two bigger entities together with us in the middle. We might even arrange some financing to let the whole thing grow. And that's it. We're going to be the tail that wags the dog. And then we'll construct a larger vision from there to be able to envision the whole thing as a major company that goes public. And we'll have some financial partners in tow, and we'll be able to grow the thing to a scale. And I personally, I see myself as some chief strategist and architect of the thing. I don't need to be a CEO forever.
For sure, for sure. Tell me a little bit about any books that you like reading or you would suggest that we read. Um, some of your favorite quotes. Give us some stuff like that.
Yeah, gosh, there's so many books.
Let me rephrase that so it'd be better. It's like, what's a book that you feel like you can't live without and that like you would I'm sorry. Cancel this out on bar. Cancel this out. I want to ask this in a better way. What book or books do you feel like is a necessity that every businessman should read?
Wow. Can I give you more than one?
Mhm.
Well, two I love, and they're great for repetitive reading, and they're very similar. One is called The Magic of Thinking Big. It's a vintage book like your Psycho-Cybernetics book. It might have even been written in the same decade. I love The Magic of Thinking Big because what happens to most business people? What happens to the 95% who are unable to keep their doors open more than, you know, 3 or 4 years? It's The Magic of Thinking Big is great, and it's really about habits of thinking for a business person. A similar book is a book by the Magic of Thinking Big is by a guy named David Schwartz. Uh, Bob Rotella, How a Champion Thinks. Great book, and it's roughly also he's got his own 10 habits of thinking. He's got a lifetime of experience helping professional athletes overcome pressure and perform well under pressure. Great book. I like Bob Berg, The Art of Persuasion. There are a lot of skills that you pick up along the way. Being able to persuade somebody of your point of view without hitting them over the head, John, is, I think you'll agree, something that's really worthwhile. So Bob Berg, The Art of Persuasion, I found extremely helpful. I know that when I get off the call with you, I'm gonna come up with a couple more that I wish I told you about, but I don't see how a business person can't benefit from those 3 books. They're great.
What are some quotes that really impacted your thinking?
Well, some quotes. Well, long ago, when I first decided to leave the corporate environment and, sail on my own wind, I read a book by Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich, which for a time was the Bible of entrepreneurship. And
Love that book. Good book.
you love that book. Yeah, the takeaway from that book, and I've seen this to be true, John, which is why I talk about the 100 million business that I'm constructed in as if it's already here, because I've experienced this repeated me in my life, right? In other words, thoughts become things, so that the things that you conceive in your mind with enough desire and the ability to put a process around it and the ability to keep that process going until it has a chance to work is a formula that you repeat over and over again in life. When I did my musical, for example, uh, the idea was so bad that even my sister looked at me and said, "This really sounds like a bad idea, Steve." But I had it in my brain and I committed to it and I had my night on Broadway. And that's just the way, thoughts become things.
And I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for coming on. Stephen, give us some plugs. How can we hear more about you? How can we get connected with what you're doing?
Our, um, our website is muchsmarter.com, all one word, much smarter. Findable and connectable on LinkedIn. I also have, like you, John, a growing content of library on YouTube about our specific process and how it applies to students. So find us in any of those places. But I think anybody that wants to get in touch with me and potential allies, if, somebody that wants to hop onto this $100 million train and has something to contribute it, DM me on LinkedIn and we can have a conversation.
Love it. Awesome. And all the links are going to be in the description. I'm going to go ahead and put Steven's LinkedIn link in the description as well. So you guys can take a look at that. Steven, thank you again so much for coming on. Really appreciate you. Guys, this has been the $100 million podcast. If you guys found value in this content, please, please, please subscribe, hit the like button, share this with somebody else that you also think will find value in this. And we'll see you next time. Bye.